Morning and welcome to the first session of the day. Today we begin with a session that looks at what it means to push the boundaries of one's art. Vidwan T.M. Krishna, an eminent photographer, Dayanita Singh will talk about a voice of one's own.
I'm Dayanita Singh. I'm a photo artist. I come from the Ustad Zakir Hussain Academy of Focus and the Italo Calvino Academy of Form. And that's my introduction. And
did you understand anything she said? Okay. I'm glad you looked very intellectual and serious. But, how do I introduce myself, especially in Chennai? I am the person who has a problem with most things that are around me. And I'm the person who keeps saying that I have a problem with most things around me. And I seriously do have problems with most things around me. That pretty much describes me. Dayanita.
I barely slept last night. I'm so excited to be sitting here, and I'd like to just start by mentioning how it all happened, because that illustrates to me really the point about the voice that I was so fascinated to discuss with TM. I had an email from S. Gopalakrishnan almost a year ago talking about A.T.M. Krishna, and being a very Hindustani person, I had not heard of T.M. Krishna, and then randomly pressed the play button. It was a YouTube link, and got completely mesmerized and spent 48 hours non-stop, barely sleeping, listening to this voice. And I knew that it was a great voice, but there was much more. And I was trying to read, and then I called Sharanappa Rao and asked if I could do a release of the File Room book in Chennai. And she said yes. She was doing a series of talks, and I definitely. And I said, well, do you think it might be possible to ask T.M. Krishna to come and release the book? This book had been released a year ago. There was no need to really do the release in Chennai. But I wanted to meet T.M. Krishna on an equal ground. I didn't want to go to his talk in Delhi, which was just happening. I wanted to meet him, like this. And that's exactly what happened. He came to release the book. He agreed to release the book. He came to the other Taj to release the book and spoke about two things, about why is my photography called black and white? Why is photography called black and white when it's all about the grays? It's anything but black and white, just impromptu. And then spoke about how the file room was perhaps the subconscious and how we store memories and not necessarily all about bureaucracy. And I thought, this is what I thrive on, this kind of a conversation, this kind of engagement. And I would, if he had said, okay, you can come and work for 2 months, I would do that because it was about realizing that here is the possibility of an incredible conversation that is going to be beyond our mediums. And I'm starved for that. And I will go to anywhere in the world to continue that conversation. And now to have the possibility to discuss a voice with you is absolutely amazing. And I hope it's just the beginning of a much, much longer conversation.
Well, I really think so. And I think what I said the other day at the launch was ultimately a response to what I felt, not what I saw when I experienced your work of art. So I think when we talk about one's own voice, and that's the whole idea of using the voice as a metaphor, whether it's about the person or the collective, or it's about creativity, expression, inquiry, or also the whole idea of the subaltern. I think there is also another problem in that expression. And the problem is, especially in the creative world, when I say one's own voice, I seem to somewhere telling myself that it's my own.
Right.
That I have this ownership of it. And that in a way it is distant from all the common voices. And that it is in some way placing it on a hierarchical position. And the hierarchy is something that is essentially problematic. So, but if we can talk about the fact that the whole idea of one's own voice is exactly the opposite. It's about being not self-centered, not detached, but being within everything that we feel and experience outside. And it is in that realm of being connected that the discovery of the voice actually happens. So the expression somehow gives us the position that we are different in some fashion.
Yeah.
We are actually talking about the fact that we are not different.
Yeah.
And that we must be able to see the fact that we are not different. And how much can we, shall we say, argue with oneself? Because we all come from certain contexts. So, and context, I think here is very important. And each of us doesn't come from one context. We come from multiple bridged contexts. So I want you to talk about that, because I think your context is very, very interesting.
Well, I think my context is very small, very tiny. Photography is, not even 200 years old, and I have come to the realization that it's really just learning the alphabet. Making photographs is like saying, I know ABC. So what? Can you make a sentence? Could you make a poem? Could you aspire to write a novel? Could you build a symphony out of those images? Making photographs it's not even the tool really, as we were saying before. It's just like the sharpener for the tool, It's just getting started. It just happens to be my medium. But for me to do anything worthwhile with it, I have to look to music, I have to look to literature. And I'm very fortunate that my training has really not been in an art school, but like I said, in the Zakir Hussain Academy of Focus, traveling with classical musicians for many winters, photographing them, but really understanding rigor and riyaz and the importance of all the conversations and stories that would go along with it. And once I had taken that on, that was my training, but then reaching a point in photography where I realized, actually, it's literature. I should have done an MA in literature, and that's why I say I come from the Italo Calvino Academy of Form. That photography is just not enough. It's only a starting thing. It's like saying I speak French or Tamil. It doesn't make me a writer. It doesn't make me a poet. And so I have to look to the other forms, both in how they create the form, both in how you will discuss the kacheri, how you will challenge the kacheri, where you want to take that conversation, and that helps me think even when I think about how we structure the talk.
Yes.
So it's not just in my medium, it's connected to everything that one really engages with in one's life. It's in my world, we sort of call it thinking out of the box all the time, pushing the limits.
As you say this, I just think of myself in terms of my context. And I would actually say that I came from a very limited thinking context, actually. I'm just, I think, I don't know whether it's your medium or whether it is yourself or the word you like, chance, that gave you that larger perspective. I would flip my life as being one where I was governed by tradition and the word we love, sampradaya, and all that. And I lived as a musician for a long time believing that is the real context and that is the music. And therefore, to live within that, not really questioning its processes, but to believe that in acceptance of all that is there is where I find my own self. And so for a long time, I think I lived like that. And for me, I think it was only a period of time when, for example, I never thought any other art form. Most classical musicians think that their art form is supremo.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Take it from me.
Okay.
Okay? And everything else is good, but you know what? We are the most sophisticated. Everybody will tell you that. So there is this underlying feeling that, we are just that notch better. So therefore, you convince yourself that everybody should be actually seeking you rather than you seeking out. So if you asked me, did I go to a Bharatanatyam performance, which is so close to this art form, I would go there and get bored because I didn't have the receptivity to realize that that was part of me, and that was going to be, that had to be part of who I am as a human being if I am going to think of myself even as a minuscule artist. And so it's, for me, I think it was a lot of things that happened through a period of time in terms of how I look back at my own music, how I started researching, that really changed my idea of what I believed was
So when you
everything.
started the sort of research and
Yes, in a very...
questioning.
Absolutely. In fact, research for me was the starting point. It was looking back at history of raga, which was the starting point for me to realize that this is what I thought it all was, but it's not that. So that, I think, led to a lot of interesting things within the art. So in a way, it is very different. But I have to ask you something here. Because I spoke about Bharatanatyam and another art form. So I'm curious about, I know we're still talking about only, not in mediums, like you said, the sharpener, okay? So if you look at what you do in terms of the creative process, and what I try doing too, is yours is a visual idea. Mine is an oral idea. And most interestingly, I believe that, I could be wrong, but please tell me I'm wrong. I'll feel much better about myself. But the fact that we carry far more historical, traditional baggage than you do.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I don't feel better, but let's go on. Then you, okay. And this is something I'm very interested in. You know, the painter, the musician, the dancer will always wax eloquent about the idea of the artistic moment, including myself. And that the whole idea that it is part of that whole continuum that is happening when art is happening. And moment as space keeps coming and going, and, you know. And if you look at a photographer, it's click, then a click, then another click. So I'm very curious on what is going on, and also the fact that the click probably doesn't matter. But I think the perception, especially in today's world, because everybody is clicking, including the gentleman who just did it a second ago. So what is happening in that process? Where does that click happen? What makes you press that button? Or do you even know you're pressing the button?
I think if you're sort of in the flow, if I'm listening to you, I'm not even responding to you visually, as you might imagine I'm doing. And that is also one of the problems, because then you end up with these photographs where the felt moment you thought was incredible, and that doesn't read in the photograph. But the click is exactly what I'm completely, I can't say against, but the click is exactly as you said, it's just the click. So I've collected A, Z, Y, X. There's not even a word there, let alone a little sonnet or a little poem. So these are just, for 30 years, I think I've been collecting different vocabulary, different words. But now, it's like this riyaz has been going on for 30 years. It's only now that I've had my first Arangetram coming to Bharatanatyam, you know. And Bharatanatyam is also part of that. And listening to you when I was working for the Kochi Biennale and I was trying to piece together images of the whole year, I had you on repeat continuously, because that just helped me get into a certain... Sorry?
It went well?
I think people were a little overwhelmed by it.
But go on.
It wasn't just one very clear line. It became quite complicated. But what I tried to do with those photographs was sort of to respond to the place where your voice takes me. And this is a big struggle. I'll never get there, because you start with a blank canvas. A photographer starts with what is there in front.
Yes.
And then I have to try and remove, and I have to remove the bottle, I have to remove the mic, maybe remove the flowers. And finally I'm left with that table, and finally I might remove the table, or I might just look at the shadow on the ground. So I have to take away from that full canvas, and you start with the blank canvas. So, you know, one can argue about who is more challenged there.
Yes, of course.
If I want to empty it, if I want to get to the Kali, which I think is the great moment for the click-click,
Yeah.
or for any art form really, and that is something I learned only from my classical music training and not from photography. So my school of photography, if there ever had to be one, would have you as visiting faculty, P. Sainath as visiting faculty, and Michael Undache as editing faculty. And that would be it. Because photography is just, it's click, click. It's nothing in itself.
I'm glad you said that, because singing is not about singing. That's also true. It is not about singing at all. And I think singing is about actually listening more than anything else, and listening not in terms of just paying attention to what is happening. And if you can just expand the idea of listening, you're actually feeling the listening too.
Yes.
And you're actually smelling the listening too. And you're actually
Yes.
seeing the listening too. And I'm using listening as a metaphor because I come from the oral world. And I think that is something that is also true of even the most obvious singing process. Because, you know, there is this example that I use in a classroom. This is a very musical example, but I'll use it. And I have my students sitting in class, and there's a line of music I'm trying to teach 5 of them. It's just one line of music. And they sing it, and there's this one student who just doesn't get it. So I go hammer, 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 hammer again. Sing it again, sing it again, sing it again. And the student sings it again and again, and the student's not got it. And it took me a long time to figure out what was going on, because I was struggling. I was struggling because I didn't know how to cross that. Then I realized that every time I opened my mouth, suppose the phrase is Kavava Kandava Yennai. Say this is a phrase. And the student just doesn't get it. I realized the moment I said Ka, the student is actually singing in his head. Whose voice is the student listening to? His own voice, and not listening to my voice at all. So most of the times we think we are listening or watching or assimilating, we are actually reiterating our own self, our own sight, our own voice, our own everything. So it is probably the whole process of engagement that we talk about is actually more self-serving as anything else. So how do we detach that self-serving part of ourselves is, I think, very much part of that voice. But now I'm going to ask you another question, because you brought that up in what you said now, is while this is true, I mean, I think it's true at least, that it is about allowing yourself to listen, to really, and this is political, social, aesthetic, everything. What about rigor? What about the whole idea of riyaz? You brought that in too. What about that whole process of being so inside that whole structure, or whatever you want to call it? What about that? How does that pan out for you?
No, that is the given. That is, you have to know your medium, your tools, like the back of your hand. However many years it takes. If you're lucky, it takes 30 years. If you're not lucky, it might take 50 years. You might never really, but if you do get to that point, then I feel you have the possibility to push some of the limits, to question. You could be wrong, and key over there is to be ready for failure, to fall on your face. And I want to do that with each work of mine. I want to push myself, I want to push what has been done in that medium, to challenge it, not just for the sake of challenging it, but because I believe that there is much more untapped material to that we have only touched maybe 10% of it, that there is a lot more to understand. And what indeed would happen, what did happen in Kochi when I did have exactly Kavava on a loop that just went on and on till the carpenter said, "Aap isko zara band kar sakte hain, please?" Because it was so loud, you know.
You're making me unpopular, you know that, right?
No, I think it got everyone to the tonal level that I wanted the work to be at. You see, you will think I'm mad if I say that, but I think if you lay out a lot of photographs on a table, you can hear the notes in them. And then when you try and build a symphony out of them, you know the off note, and you know where you need the Kali, and you know what has to go out, however much you might love it. So to have a musical reference for that is resonating in your head continuously, 24 hours, just helps you in that process. At least it helps me.
I think it's true of music too. I mean, I think it is very important, as much as we spoke about rigor within the craft, I think there's a rigor which is also beyond the craft.
Yes.
The rigor of immersion, the rigor
Yes.
of assimilation, the rigor of constantly being in that process of inquiry. That itself is a rigor. And art itself is just something you stumble upon.
Yes.
I don't think anybody sits over here and says, you know, I'm going to make good art, or I'm going to just
Well, that's
go.
the end.
That's the end, yeah. And so what you're actually doing is you're building the edifice, you're building all that goes into it, and not just in terms of the medium, but in terms of your own living. You're building structures there, and that is a conscious decision. I think that is very important also to state, because it's not something that can automatically happen.
Yeah, you
Right?
want to build a space where you allow that art to
Exactly.
happen.
Exactly.
And one is the rigor of your medium and all that you have assimilated, all the conversations, all the inquiry that is going on. But I would love to ask you about, for me, building that space, it was very important to be a soloist to be in that space, because I have to be open to the chance of maybe getting onto the train to Bangalore with you tomorrow because I want to hear that concert, and being able to drop everything else. And therefore, for me, for my inquiry, it was really important that I remain completely a soloist, that there is nothing that I am bound to in a familial way. But you have a wonderful family, and yet you are so free. And I wonder how that is possible, because for me, I thought it could never be possible to be so free in your head.
Well, that's a good question, a difficult question, actually. Because I think it's ultimately about relationship, right? Whether you call it your wife or your children or anybody else or a friend I think it's about relationship. There are two things here. One, there is relationship. One, there is physical space. So there are two parts. One is you're
Right.
sharing physical space,
Yes.
which means you're actually sharing mental space. But once you get there, you're also talking about people who may live 100 miles away, but they are still part of your space. So to me, I'm not sure that the non-existence of somebody in your physical space really is about the space. The space is how can you constantly create that in your own self. And of course, you have relationships with people who understand that space too.
Right,
So whether they live with you or not,
right.
they understand your space.
Yeah.
So they know that your space exists in such a way that you'll take the train tomorrow morning. And I think the same thing exists in a family, that there is the space that is real and the space that is experienced and understood. So it doesn't matter that we live in the same house, because I think just by looking at each other, we know what's going on. And we know that my wife knows that I may just take a hike for the next 20 days and just disappear. And that is as much part of, I think, that. And I also think, for me at least personally, that the fact that I'm interacting with another person's space also gives me far more perspective to my own space.
Right.
I
get
think that is also very important.
Yes.
Because I'm interacting with another person's space constantly. And that, I think, brings it back to you understanding the idea of space as being something extremely responsible in itself and not whimsical. So I think that that's how I look at this whole idea of being physically with other people in my own home, but yet looking at space slightly differently from what you said. Yeah. And, sorry, you have something to say?
No.
Okay. But, there's this whole, we kept talking about receiving, about being, we did talk about, without talking about it as receiving or openness. But, a lot of people have asked me this question. Why do you write? I was asked this question on this stage last year, actually. Why do you write? Why do you speak?
Because you're such a good singer.
Exactly. Why do you just sing? Why do you do all these things? Why do you want to know what's happening in the political scenario?
That's why I call you my Guru Bhai.
So, and I've been asked this question constantly, I've been told this constantly, and what is most interesting is how it is not perceived as one whole being by itself.
Right.
And that if I don't see myself reacting, probably not reacting, but responding to what I see everywhere around myself, how can I respond to a Gandhara and Shankarabharanam? How can I expect to respond to that? How can I think that I'm actually living that Ga of Shankarabharanam when I'm not living what I see? Like I was saying this morning, when I go meet a fruit seller. And
Last night, tell us about last night.
Okay, last night I was part of this initiative of changing the way we experience art in this city. This city is considered culturally very, very vacant, especially in terms of the classical forms. The Chennai December season is talked about, but the fact is that season is only experienced by about 2% of the population in about 15 pockets in the city. But it's the Chennai December season. That's quite a joke. But so the whole idea was, is there a way we can think about spaces, people, art forms, and change these contexts? So we tried creating a festival in a fisherman's village in the city called Urur Olcott Kuppam. And it's a fisherman's village, it's older than this city, that village. And what we did a festival with the people of the Kuppam, where we had Carnatic, we had Bharatanatyam, we had Parayattam, we had Villupatte, all on the same stage, which was the beach. And it was very interesting because we had people of different contexts coming and rubbing shoulders, listening to art forms that they would not listen to normally. Imagine listening to Parayattam before they heard Kamboji Ragam. I mean, seriously, that's problematic for many people. But what is most interesting about the experiment, forget about what happened, is that this is not just an aesthetic question. This is not just a musical question. This is also a social question. This is also a political question. And how can you detach any of this from singing or from capturing a moment? And how can we think that they are separate worlds? And so this leads to the question I'm asking you is, I'm asked this question. If you speak to a fruit seller on the road and she tells you about her life, how does it change the way you sing Kamboji tomorrow morning? I mean, it's a ridiculous question. But I think it changes the way I feel Kamboji. It may not change the phraseology of Kamboji, but Kamboji is not in its phrase, just like the photo is not in the click. But the way I feel when I sing that line of music, that conversation with the fruit seller is very important to me because it depends on how I was in the moment with that fruit seller that day. And it is that very same ability to be in the moment with the fruit seller that I'm carrying to singing Kamboji on the stage. If I don't see these two things as being together, I don't know why we can call ourselves creative people or artists.
And therefore, in my school of photography, where there would be no photography teachers, because that is a 7-minute YouTube video.
Which you're going to release
Which
soon.
I'm going to make.
That's an official announcement today.
You said to me last time when we met in August that anybody can sing. And it's very important for everybody to sing. Just to know, I think the word was how you can expand your throat. Could that be?
Something like that.
Something like that. And it is exactly that kind of, knowing that kind of potential in yourself, that would then inform how you think about your photography and where you want to take your photography. There will always be people who will say, oh, but Dayanita, you're such a good photographer. Why do you need to go on and on about this? What are these museums you're building? Why
All
are you
these
so
books that
obsessed
you
with
put-
these books? Just make your photos, hang them on the wall. That's exactly what I will not do. But I think for myself, even at this age, I would still try to find a teacher who might teach someone of my age how to open my throat. Because I'm convinced if I understood that, if I realized even 1% of that, it would change the way I photograph the empty spaces.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, similar thing happened to me with an art form called Katte Kuttu, which we also
Yes.
had was there yesterday. I saw it for the first time 4 years ago, and I looked at it blank the first time and said, I almost felt that I came from the whole place that we were these evolved classical musicians, right? And I looked at it and I had no clue, not just question of understanding, but I just felt that that was not me. But I spent half an hour with it, and then I know Katte Kuttu is part of what I should do. In fact, like you said, it is more important after a point of time to not sing
Yes.
and to do everything else. Because,
Same here.
yeah, exactly, because we can just keep on learning 150 compositions. I'm not saying rigor is not important.
Yes.
200 compositions, just go on. But then you have to let that be. Let that be. And because the moment you touch, how you touch what you already have changes. And it changes so fast. And I think that is very important. But then, now that we are saying this, I want to talk about one more idea. I don't know how much time we have, but nevertheless. Totally 10 minutes to go? Okay. So quickly before we are cut off, just two quick things. One thing is, we both of us spoke about the voice, and I think we all spoke about the fact that the voice is not about the craft, and it's about being a human being ultimately, and finding that human being in everybody that we see and everything that we touch. But then I have to ask you a question. Artists are one of the worst people to meet in life. Aren't they? Say yes.
Sometimes.
Well, you know what I mean, right? There you listen to them sing and it's like, God, this is God. This is divine. You've said it yourself. So, and then you talk to them for 1 hour and I'm like, oh my goodness. Is this the same person? I need to ask you now that we've waxed eloquent about this whole idea of being with. How do you rationalize this? Or what do you say about this? I have something to say, but I'll say after you do.
I then retreat and I say, okay, I don't want to meet the artist because then the contradictions are too difficult. And sometimes there's a surprise. You have been a wonderful surprise. There are other friends we know who have been a wonderful surprise.
Absolutely.
Where what their art and their life is one and the same thing. And then it's a wonderful surprise. But yes, I agree, it doesn't happen all the time.
I'm going to go one step further and say something. I think there is a problem in their voice. I know I'm risking a lot when I say this.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say this. Because I think that we have to recognize that there is, because I'm not talking about art doing you enjoying something or it really overwhelming you, because there's so many facets that go into that experience, and you're about yourself 70% of the facet. 30% is actually the artist, actually. It is you who are receiving it, who is actually generating a lot of what you experience. But I do think that an artist, I'm not saying that I have to be in agreement with the artist's positions. I'm not saying.
Of course not.
But if I see an artist that is not open to the experience of life as a larger whole, but is singing in that quarter, I think that artist has a problem in the search for the voice. I think there is a problem there. Now, whether it's recognized as one is a self-inquiry for the artist or not. And I'm not even saying this as a blame game. I'm just saying that I think there is something there, or there is some context that is limiting ourselves to move beyond, to allow us. And I think it is important as a human being to allow yourself to be vulnerable. If you're not vulnerable,
Oh, absolutely.
I think then you're not a human being. And you're missing a lot in experience.
You know who explained this really well? Our now common friend Anish. He said, if an artist doesn't have a rich inner life, then what comes out is just bubbles.
Well, I think that says it, right? I'll end with one last point, and I think it makes it's very important that we talk about in the context of what has happened in Tamil Nadu and what has happened around the world, and that's about one's own voice and censorship of one's own voice. I'd like to say something about that.
To me, it is still quite unimaginable that we should have that we should even have got to this kind of a situation. It doesn't even fit together, and it really frightens me. And I also did think that when one is talking about a voice of one's own, it's all wonderful to find that, and then when that is crushed, I really don't know what I would do.
Yeah.
I don't know how I could. It's you sort of you've invested everything into finding that voice.
Yes.
And you have taken from so much from the whole world and said, okay, this is something that I have to offer. And when that offering is completely trampled upon and you are trampled upon, I cannot imagine even what it must be like.
Yeah, and I also think there is a problem with all of us here, because I think we wait for the point of censorship to respond.
Yes.
We have to wait for
How did
somebody
it
to be
get to-
censured
Yeah.
to then say, oh my goodness,
Yes.
this is not. What are we doing for the rest of the year?
Yeah.
We're just sitting and doing nothing. So I think there is also a problem that we have to wait to the point of this for us to
Yes.
talk about it.
Yeah.
We should be talking about it every day.
Yeah.
We should be discussing this. Should be part of discourse every day. And only then I think we will not get to this point, or we hopefully will not get to this point. Then I think we're done with time.
Oh, really? Well, I have something I wanted to say.
Okay.
I wanted to say, we took an hour of your time, but actually all you had to do was to buy this book. And there are 10 pages in here in a chapter called Imagination, Creativity, Improvisation that I started to underline to read out to you. And then I realized I would be underlining everything. So I thought I would just photocopy those chapters and with
please.
the publisher sitting right here, hand them out to all of you as a voice of one's own.
You're a darling, but thank you very much.
Do we take questions?
I think so. Any questions?
Thank you. Thank you for the rambling, interesting conversation. I hope you didn't rehearse that. My question really is, are you recommending Lit for Life in the hills of Sahyadri or in the desert of Rajasthan next? Would you recommend that?
I'm not a spokesperson for the Hindu. I don't know why I was asked this question. I think the directors are all seated here. You should ask them that
No,
question.
it's on the basis of your,
I recommend conversation anywhere. Why Lit for Life? I think we both recommend conversation anywhere. And it doesn't matter whether it's Hill of Sahyadri or whether it is Chennai or whether it is Mizoram or whether it is Timbuktu. Let's all talk. Let's keep talking.
Let's Keep Talking is a great title. Yes, let's keep talking. Not let's
Litfest, next
talk.
title will be Let's Keep Talking.
My question for you, here.
Yeah.
My question for you is, in the past few years, you've been talking about your current journey of life. And in the process of talking about your present journey of life, you tend to marginalize the effort that brought you here, the traditional Carnatic style of training that got you here. And many times when you speak, it feels like that was not important to you.
No.
And I want you to clarify that point for us.
I don't think I ever used the word current. And I'm pretty certain I haven't, because I'm kind of careful about putting myself in that position. What I think I have said always, and I'll continue to say, is that I am part of the continuum of what started with sa, pa, sa. And it also gives me the right to question sa, pa, sa. To go through a rigor, to respect the rigor, and to continue with the rigor means you continue with the questioning. Otherwise, it is not rigor. It is then what you would call repetition. And that I refuse to do.
Very well said.
I have a question based on a statement statement that you made about the blank canvas, Dayanita, but I'm sorry, the question is not for you. You mentioned that your music, you always start on a blank slate, whereas you start on a full slate. And I would think that your slate, your canvas is probably very crowded with, the ghosts of history, tradition, expectations. When you sing, say, a Kambodi or Shankara Bharanam, do you really start on a blank slate? I mean, how do you make it unique or
I don't try to make anything unique or fresh. The moment I try that, it's a complete mess. I think nobody should ever in their life think of singing a unique Kamboji. No, I think the idea of blankness must be just maybe understood with a nuance over here. Blankness is not that there is no form. When she says there's blankness, she's not saying there's no form. I'm talking musically now. So the blankness comes from the fact that the form is dissolved, okay? And you're just going into it. Now, does that mean you will not sing phrases that are there before? That's not the point. The point is what happens in the process of singing that phrase. Where are you hanging? You're actually hanging. You're not stationed. You're hanging. So can you continue hanging and moving and holding? And so I think the blankness comes from the fact that where your hand is going to reach out to, what it's going to grasp, and where it's going to move is completely blank. That is blank. Now, I know Kamboji, the technique, it's like craft. The technique of photography is not the point. The technique of Kamboji is not the point. But the Kamboji is the point, and the blankness is there, not in the craft of the Kamboji. It's a little abstract, but it is experiential. And it is, it is not at all scary. If you cannot do that, I leave it there. We'll take one question and wrap, please. There's a gentleman there.
So first of all, my heartfelt appreciations on your efforts to democratize Carnatic music to across all the caste. And I would like to know.
Go on.
I would like to know from you how your efforts to democratize Carnatic music, how that efforts are received, and how your fellow colleagues reacting to that. How it is perceived by your colleagues who are predominantly Brahmins.
I'm Brahmin too by birth, but nothing more than that.
How it is received by your colleagues in Carnatic music, in Chennai particularly?
I mean, I really think that artists, most artists within themselves just love to share. And if you ask them to share, they'll share with anybody. But the question is, who's going to provide the context for them to share to different people, to different experiences, to different diverse opinions? I think that's the enabling is all that we all can try and do. We enable that process. And I think my experience till now has been every artist, musician or otherwise, is open to always moving to uncomfortable parts of themselves and uncomfortable parts of their understanding of what lives around them. I think it's a question of how do you enable it. And I think that's where not just me, not just Dayanita, I think it's not just in the work that she does and the work I do. I think we all have a responsibility to try and take that forward.
Let's keep talking.
Let's keep talking. Thank you very much.
Lovely.